Arthur Schopenhauer was a German philosopher with one of the darkest and most uncomfortable views of human life. He believed that most human beings are trapped in a cycle they do not understand. We spend our lives wanting things. We want money, love, beauty, success, comfort, attention, admiration, and security. We tell ourselves that once we finally get these things, life will become peaceful. We imagine that happiness is waiting somewhere in the future, behind the next achievement, the next relationship, the next amount of money, or the next version of ourselves. Schopenhauer thought this was one of the greatest illusions in human life. He did not believe that desire leads to lasting happiness. He believed that desire usually leads to suffering, and that even when desire is satisfied, the satisfaction does not last for very long. The moment we get what we want, the mind quickly adjusts to it. The dream becomes normal. The prize loses its shine. The feeling of lack returns in a new form. This is why Schopenhauer remains so disturbing. He does not tell us that we are unhappy because we have failed. He tells us that we may still be unhappy, even if we succeed. Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in the city of Danzig, which is now Gdansk in Poland. He grew up in a wealthy merchant family, and his father wanted him to enter business. But Schopenhauer was drawn toward philosophy, literature, art, and the darker questions of existence. He was deeply influenced by Plato, Kant, Buddhism, Hindu thought, and the everyday observation that human beings seem rarely at peace. His personality was difficult. He was lonely, proud, suspicious, and often bitter. He did not have an easy life emotionally, and for much of his career, he felt ignored by the academic world. His major work, The World as Will and Representation, did not make him immediately famous. For many years, he was a philosopher speaking into silence, but this suited the darkness of his philosophy. Schopenhauer believed that beneath all the appearances of the world, there is a blind, restless force that he called the will. The will is not simply what we consciously decide to do. It is deeper than ordinary choice. It is the force that pushes every living thing to survive, reproduce, struggle, compete, eat, possess, and continue. It is not rational. It does not have a final plan. It does not care whether we are happy. It only wants to keep wanting. This was Schopenhauer's great insight. Human beings like to imagine that they are guided mainly by reason. We like to think that we choose our goals carefully and logically. But Schopenhauer believed that reason is often just a servant of desire. We first want something, and then the mind invents reasons to justify the wanting. A man might say that he wants a certain career because it is meaningful, noble, or practical. But underneath, he may want admiration, security, status, or revenge against people who once underestimated him. A person might say that he wants love because he has found someone perfect, but underneath, he may be driven by loneliness, sexual desire, insecurity, or the deep biological pressure to attach himself to another person. Schopenhauer did not think this made human beings evil. He thought it made them tragic. We are pushed around by forces inside us, and then we mistake those forces for freedom. This is why getting what we want so often disappoints us. A poor person may dream of money. He imagines that once he has enough money, he will finally be calm. He will not worry. He will not feel inferior. He will not feel trapped. He will wake up each morning with a feeling of security and victory. But if he becomes rich, the peace does not last. He begins comparing himself to richer people. He worries about losing what he has gained. He discovers new desires that were previously invisible. The old problems disappear, but new ones arrive. The house that once looked like paradise becomes ordinary. The car that once seemed like a dream becomes transportation. The number in the bank account that once felt impossible becomes the new baseline. Schopenhauer would say that this is not an accident. It is the nature of desire. Desire promises final satisfaction, but it only gives temporary relief. The same thing happens with love. A lonely person may imagine that love will complete him. He thinks that if one person finally understands him, desires him, and stays with him, the emptiness inside him will disappear. Love appears to be the answer to everything. It seems to promise meaning, comfort, identity, and rescue from loneliness. But once love is gained, a new kind of suffering begins. There is fear of rejection. There is jealousy. There is dependency. There is disappointment when the other person fails to be exactly what the imagination created. There is anxiety about being loved enough, understood enough, chosen enough, and protected enough. Even successful love does not abolish desire. It creates new desires. We want more attention, more certainty, more proof. We want someone to stay the same and change at once. Love that's exciting but safe. Intimacy but freedom. We want another person to solve a problem rooted inside ourselves. Schopenhauer saw romantic love darkly. We think we choose freely, but nature uses beauty and longing to push us together for its own purpose. Reproduction, not our happiness. Before we have someone, they seem almost divine, as if they hold the answer to life. Once the dream becomes real, they become human again. Moody, flawed, ordinary, limited. Beauty works the same way. A person believes that if he becomes attractive enough, he'll finally be free of shame, admired, chosen. But beauty brings its own prison, comparison, fear of aging, dependence on others' eyes. Attention isn't love. Desire isn't the same as being known. Praise doesn't silence insecurity for long. Status follows the same trap. Recognition fades fast. The applause that once felt life-changing becomes expected, and a new achievement, a new rival, is always required. This is why Schopenhauer believed life swings between suffering and boredom. One of his most famous claims: when desire is blocked, we suffer. When it's satisfied, we grow bored, because the will has nothing left to chase. So it invents a new target. It's a wheel that never stops. We believe achievement will end the hunger, but the hunger survives. Only its object changes. This cuts against the modern promise that happiness means getting more. More money, more freedom, more options. More doesn't solve the problem. A person can gain everything he once wanted and still feel haunted by the next absence. This is why people who seem to have perfect lives can still be miserable inside. The will keeps moving, keeps whispering that something is missing. He didn't deny pleasures are real. Food, love, music can genuinely feel good, just that they are temporary, unable to cure the restless structure of desire. Art, especially music, offered a partial escape. When we experience it deeply, we stop possessing it for our own ambition and simply observe, briefly lifted out of the chase. Compassion offered another. Feeling it breaks the illusion that we're separate from others, softening egoism and turning us from endless self-concern. He also admired renunciation. Peace comes not from satisfying every desire, but from loosening its grip, an idea close to Buddhism's view of craving as suffering's root. None of this means rejecting life. It means growing suspicious of our own wanting. noticing how desire always promises one more thing will finally be enough, and how that promise keeps failing. Diogenes believed that most of society was fake. He did not mean people were lying every second of the day. He meant something deeper and more insulting. He believed most human beings spend their lives chasing things that were planted in them by other people. They call it ambition, success, or maturity. A lot of it is just social conditioning dressed up as purpose. People want money because society says money proves value. They want status because society says status means importance. They want luxury because society says luxury means success. They want approval because society says approval means worth. Diogenes looked at all of that and thought it was absurd. He believed human beings had buried their freedom under layers of performance, vanity, and fake respectability. He was born around 412 BC in Sinope, a Greek city on the Black Sea, and later moved to Athens, where he became one of the most shocking philosophers in history. He belonged to a school called Cynicism, which attacked wealth, convention, and social hypocrisy at the root. Today, the word cynic means someone bitter or distrustful. The ancient cynics were different. They believed most people suffered because they had become slaves to unnecessary desires. They wanted human beings to live more simply, more honestly, and more freely. Diogenes took that idea to an extreme. He owned almost nothing. He rejected luxury. He mocked the powerful. Ancient stories say he slept in a large jar, ate whatever he could find, and walked through Athens in broad daylight, holding a lamp, saying he was searching for an honest man. That was the point. He wanted to show that the real madness was not his behavior. The real madness was the way everyone else lived. Most people thought Diogenes was strange because he refused to follow society. Diogenes thought society was strange because it spent its life chasing things that did not matter. That is the first lesson. Society teaches people to desire their own chains. A man may think he is free because nobody is physically forcing him to buy expensive things or chase prestige. Diogenes would ask a harder question. If nobody is forcing you, why are you still obeying? Why do you care so much about looking successful? Why do you fear being laughed at? Why do you feel ashamed of simplicity? The deeper problem was not just that society controls people from the outside. It was that people learn to love the very things that control them. A man becomes a slave to wealth and calls it ambition. A young person becomes a slave to trends and calls it individuality. Diogenes believed freedom begins when a person no longer needs society's approval. That is what made him dangerous. He did not try to overthrow society. He refused to take it seriously. He treated kings, rich men, and respectable citizens as if they were trapped in a ridiculous game. The most famous story about him involves Alexander the Great. Alexander was one of the most powerful men alive. He visited Diogenes and asked if there was anything he could do for him. Diogenes, lying in the sun, replied that Alexander could move aside because he was blocking the light. Alexander had power, wealth, and glory. Diogenes wanted sunlight, and in that moment, Diogenes looked more free than the emperor. That is the second lesson. The person who needs the least is the hardest to control. If you need luxury, money controls you. If you need admiration, applause controls you. If you need status, shame controls you. Diogenes chose poverty not because poverty is good, but to prove that human beings can live with far less than they think. People become weak because they multiply their needs. The more things you believe you cannot live without, the easier you are to manipulate. A person with few needs is difficult to threaten. A person with endless needs is always vulnerable. That is why Diogenes hated luxury. Luxury does not just give pleasure, it trains dependence. Once a person gets used to it, simplicity starts to feel like humiliation. What was once unnecessary begins to feel like survival. Diogenes would have called that slavery with better packaging. Modern life has only made this worse. People live surrounded by images of ideal lives, perfect bodies, expensive vacations, polished careers, edited happiness. Everyone is performing. People no longer just live. They display that they are living. They do not just eat, they photograph the food. They do not just travel, they prove they traveled. They do not just exist, they manage an image. Diogenes would have seen modern life as one giant theater of insecurity, where everyone pretends to be free while constantly checking whether the audience approves. That leads to the third lesson. Most of what people call identity is performance. We like to believe we are original, that our tastes and goals are fully our own. Diogenes would ask how much was chosen freely and how much was absorbed from the crowd. Do you want what you want because it is good, or because it makes you look good? He believed most people are actors who have forgotten they are acting. They play the successful professional, the fashionable person, the respectable citizen, and then call it life. He wanted something more honest. Philosophy should not just be spoken. It should be lived. He turned his own life into a protest. His poverty, his shamelessness, and his insults were all part of the argument. He wanted to expose how many of our deepest fears are artificial. That brings us to the fourth lesson. Shame is one of society's strongest weapons. Society does not need to imprison everyone. It only needs to make people afraid of embarrassment. Once people fear shame, they police themselves. Diogenes practiced shamelessness to break that power. People are often more ashamed of looking poor than being dishonest, more ashamed of the wrong clothes than weak character. He thought a society like that had its values upside down. It cared more about appearance than truth, more about reputation than freedom. His answer was simple and brutal. Society is a lie when it teaches people to confuse approval with worth, luxury with happiness, and status with freedom. To Diogenes, the free person is not the one who has the most. It is the one who can live with the least and still remain himself. In a world obsessed with image, he teaches honesty. In a world obsessed with status, he teaches indifference. A society built on performance will always tell us to improve the mask. Diogenes tells us to remove it. But removing the mask is not a single act. It is a daily war. The mask grows back. Every morning, society hands it to you again, freshly painted, and asks you to wear it just one more time. One more purchase to feel adequate. One more post to feel seen. One more compromise to stay respectable. Diogenes knew this. That is why he did not retire from his rebellion. He lived it until the end, in the open, where everyone could watch. So the question he leaves us with is not comfortable, and it was never meant to be. It follows you into every room. When you buy something, ask whether you want it or want to be seen owning it. When you chase a goal, ask whether it is yours or borrowed from a crowd you never chose. When you feel shame, ask who taught you to feel it and whether they deserve that power over you. Most people will never ask. It is easier to keep performing. The applause feels like love, and the mask feels like a face. Nietzsche believed most people do not want greatness. They say they do. They admire it. They praise it from a safe distance. But when greatness gets close, they back away. Because greatness is expensive. It costs comfort. It costs approval. It costs the illusion that you can stay the same and still become extraordinary. For Nietzsche, greatness was not fame, not money, not applause. It was self-overcoming. It meant becoming stronger than the weaker parts of yourself. It meant facing the truth. It meant walking away from the crowd. It meant building a life that belongs to you. And that is where most people freeze. Nietzsche was born in 1844 in Prussia. His father was a Lutheran pastor. He grew up around religion, discipline, and classical education. He was brilliant early, especially in Greek and language. By his mid-20s, he was already a professor at Basel. On paper, it looked like a perfect life. But Nietzsche was never built for comfort. He quit the university. He lived with constant health problems. He moved from place to place across Europe. He was often alone. His books were ignored for years. He suffered. He was isolated, and he kept writing anyway. That is the first lesson in Nietzsche. Greatness does not come wrapped in ease. It comes through resistance, through pressure, through pain, through the parts of life that try to break you. Nietzsche believed human beings are unfinished. We are not fixed. We are not complete. We are pulled in two directions. One part of us wants comfort. The other wants growth. One part wants safety. The other wants truth. One part wants to fit in. The other wants to become someone real. That inner battle is what he called self-overcoming. And it is brutal. Because the real enemy is not always out there. It is inside you. It is the voice that says, don't risk it. Don't stand out. Don't fail. Don't get rejected. Don't make life harder than it has to be. That voice sounds practical. Nietzsche would call it weakness. This is why so many people are afraid of greatness. Greatness demands struggle. Modern life does everything it can to avoid struggle. We want comfort. We want convenience. We want quick wins, soft landings, and zero friction. But strength does not grow in comfort. It grows under pressure. Courage needs danger. Discipline needs temptation. Independence needs loneliness. Creativity needs uncertainty. If you avoid pain at all costs, you also avoid becoming more than you are. And that is where comfort becomes dangerous. It weakens quietly. You stop taking risks. You stop saying hard things. You stop testing yourself. You start calling fear peace. You start calling laziness balance. You start calling smallness contentment. Nietzsche hated that kind of self-deception. He wanted people to be honest. Sometimes you are not calm. You are afraid. Sometimes you are not humble. You are hiding. Sometimes you are not wise. You are avoiding responsibility. That is hard to hear. But Nietzsche was not interested in making people feel better. He was interested in making them wake up. The second reason people fear greatness is the crowd. Nietzsche saw society as a herd, not because people are stupid, because people are contagious. We copy each other. We repeat each other. We protect each other's comfort. And the herd does not like anyone who breaks pattern. It likes obedience. It likes sameness. It likes predictable people with safe opinions. But it pretends to love greatness, usually only after greatness is dead, after the artist is gone, after the rebel is gone, after the thinker has already paid the price. While greatness is alive, it is usually disturbing. It makes people nervous. It reminds them of what they did not do. It exposes the life they settled for. That is why original people are often hated before they are admired. They make everyone else feel something dangerous. A different thinker exposes lazy thinking. A bold person exposes fear. A disciplined person exposes excuses. So people attack what they secretly envy. They call ambition selfish. They call confidence arrogance. They call originality weird. They call discipline obsession. Often, that is just resentment in a nicer suit. And resentment is one of Nietzsche's biggest warnings. Because resentment lets people feel morally superior to what they are too afraid to become. I didn't want that. I didn't need that. That thing is bad anyway. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes it is just fear talking. The third reason people fear greatness is loneliness. To become truly independent, you have to stand apart. And that is hard. Human beings want to belong. We want to be understood. We want our choices to be accepted by family, friends, and culture. But the higher path often means being misunderstood. Your standards look extreme. Your goals look unrealistic. Your silence looks arrogant. Your solitude looks strange. Most people cannot handle that. They would rather fit in than grow up. They would rather be accepted than transformed. Nietzsche believed a serious person eventually has to stop asking the crowd for permission, because the crowd will always try to drag you back to average, and the crowd is not only outside you, it lives in your own head. It says, "What will people think? Who do you think you are? Be realistic. Don't aim too high. Stay safe." Nietzsche's philosophy is a fight against that voice. He wanted people to become who they are, not who they were trained to be, not who they were praised to be, not who the crowd finds comfortable. But that process is violent. It means killing false versions of yourself. It means losing old identities. It means giving up the easy life of approval. And then there is responsibility. That is the deepest fear. Because greatness means you can no longer hide. You cannot blame everything on society. You cannot blame your parents forever. You cannot blame the times, the system, or bad luck. If you choose your own path, you own it. You decide what matters. You decide what to sacrifice. You decide what kind of person you are becoming. That is terrifying, because it means no more excuses. Nietzsche wanted people to stop living passively. He wanted them to become creators of value. People who do not just repeat life. People who shape it, and that means saying yes to reality. Not a soft yes, a hard yes. A yes to struggle, a yes to loss, a yes to pain being part of the process. This is where Nietzsche's idea of loving fate comes in. He did not mean pretending life is pleasant. He meant refusing resentment. He meant taking even suffering and using it, turning it into strength, turning it into fuel. Most people do not want that. They want life to get easier first. Nietzsche says no. The higher person does not wait for perfect conditions. He works with what he has. That is why Nietzsche still hits so hard today. Modern life is full of escape routes, distraction, entertainment, comfort, delay, validation, noise. There is always something telling you not to change. There's always something telling you that your fear is wisdom. Nietzsche cuts through all of it. He asks one simple question. Are you becoming yourself, or just staying safe? Are your values really yours, or borrowed? Are you growing stronger, or just more comfortable? Are you living with courage, or hiding behind excuses? That is why Nietzsche is not a comforting philosopher. He does not flatter weakness. He exposes it. But he also believes in what people can become. That is the point. His philosophy is harsh because his vision is high. He believed human beings could become stronger, freer, deeper, and more original, but only if they are willing to pay the price. And the price is always the same: struggle, loneliness, responsibility, the death of the smaller self. Most people are afraid of greatness because greatness asks too much. It asks you to stop hiding. It asks you to stop worshiping comfort. It asks you to stop confusing approval with truth. It asks you to stop protecting the weak version of yourself. And maybe that is why Nietzsche still matters. Because greatness is not impossible. It is possible. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most powerful men in the ancient world, but the philosophy he left behind was not about power. It was about self-control. He was a Roman emperor, a military commander, a judge, a statesman, and the ruler of a vast empire. He had armies under his command, enemies at the borders, political problems in Rome, sickness spreading through the empire, and constant responsibilities that would have overwhelmed most people. But in the middle of all this, Marcus Aurelius kept returning to one question. How should a person control himself when the world refuses to be controlled? That question is the heart of Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius was born in 121 AD into a wealthy and respected Roman family. He was educated in literature, law, rhetoric, and philosophy, and from a young age, he was prepared for public life. Eventually, he became Emperor of Rome. Ruling from 161 to 180, this was not a peaceful period. His reign was marked by war, plague, political pressure, and personal loss. Yet the book for which he is remembered today was not written as a public speech or a political manifesto. It was not written to impress an audience. It was not even meant to be published. It was a private notebook, written mostly to himself, later known as Meditations. That is what makes Marcus Aurelius so unusual. He was not writing like a man trying to sound wise. He was writing like a man trying to stay sane. In his private notes, Marcus reminds himself not to be controlled by anger, praise, insult, fear, pleasure, or pain. He reminds himself that other people will be rude, selfish, dishonest, arrogant, and ungrateful. He reminds himself that the body will suffer, reputation will change, life will pass quickly, and death will come. But he also reminds himself of something more important. The mind can choose its judgment. This is one of the central ideas of Stoicism. We do not control most of what happens to us, but we can control how we interpret what happens. We cannot control every insult, delay, failure, betrayal, sickness, or disappointment. But we can examine the opinion we form about these things. For Marcus Aurelius, freedom does not begin when the world finally behaves the way we want. Freedom begins when we stop giving every event the power to command our soul. This is why his philosophy is so useful in modern life. We live in a time where people are constantly reacting. A comment appears on a screen, and someone becomes angry. A piece of bad news appears, and someone becomes afraid. A stranger disrespects us, and we carry the insult for the rest of the day. A person ignores a message, and the mind begins creating stories. A small failure happens, and we treat it as proof that life is falling apart. Modern people are surrounded by triggers. Phones deliver outrage directly into the hand. Social media turns every opinion into a public performance. News cycles feed fear, comparison, jealousy, and anger. A person can wake up peacefully and, within minutes, be pulled into someone else's argument, someone else's panic, or someone else's hatred. Marcus Aurelius would have found the technology strange, but the human problem completely familiar. People are disturbed not only by events, but by the judgments they attach to events. If someone insults us, the insult itself may last only a few seconds. The real suffering often comes afterward, when we keep repeating it in the mind. We imagine what we should have said. We build a case against the person. We feel humiliated, attacked, and disrespected. We turn one sentence into an entire drama. Marcus would ask us to pause. Has the insult damaged your character? Has it made you less honest, less disciplined, less just, or less wise? If not, then why surrender your peace to it? This does not mean that insults are pleasant, or that injustice should be ignored. Stoicism is not about pretending nothing matters. It is about refusing to let every external event become the ruler of your inner life. This is the first big lesson from Marcus Aurelius. You do not have to react to everything that touches you. A reaction feels automatic, but often it is a habit. Someone speaks rudely, and we immediately become defensive. Something goes wrong, and we immediately complain. A plan changes, and we immediately feel attacked by life. We act as if the event itself forced our response. Marcus Aurelius teaches that there is a space between what happens and what we do with it. In that space, character is formed. A person who reacts to everything is not free. He is controlled by the world around him. His mood depends on the weather, the news, the opinions of strangers, the behavior of coworkers, the approval of friends, and the small accidents of the day. He may believe he is independent, but in reality, his emotions are being pulled around by whatever happens next. The Stoic person tries to become less dependent on external conditions. He does not expect the world to be gentle before he becomes calm. He tries to build calmness before the world tests him. This was necessary for Marcus because his world was full of tests. He could not afford to be emotionally destroyed by every crisis. An emperor who reacts impulsively can ruin lives. A ruler who is controlled by anger can become cruel. A commander ruled by fear can make terrible decisions. A man ruled by vanity can become a slave to praise. Marcus understood that power over others is dangerous unless a person first has power over himself. That is the second big lesson. The greatest empire to govern is the self. Most people want more control over the outside world. They want other people to behave better. They want life to become easier. They want strangers to be kinder, enemies to disappear, partners to understand them perfectly, and society to stop being frustrating. Marcus Aurelius would say that this is the wrong starting point. The world has always contained difficult people. It has always contained delays, losses, illness, betrayal, stupidity, arrogance, and change. To expect life to stop producing these things is to misunderstand life. The better question is not how to remove every difficulty. The better question is how to become the kind of person who can meet difficulty without becoming worse. Marcus writes again and again as if he is preparing himself for human disappointment. He expects to meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, aggressive, treacherous, and selfish. But he does not use this as an excuse to hate them. He reminds himself that they act this way because they are confused about good and evil. This is a very important Stoic idea. People do wrong because they do not truly understand what is good. They chase money, pleasure, status, revenge, and power because they think these things will make them happy. They become arrogant because they mistake superiority for strength. They become cruel because they mistake domination for security. They become dishonest because they think advantage is more important than integrity. Marcus does not tell us to be naive. He tells us to understand. If someone behaves badly, we should not immediately let their bad character infect our own. Their anger does not require our anger. Their rudeness does not require our rudeness. Their lack of discipline does not require us to abandon discipline. This is extremely difficult. It is much easier to mirror the world. If people are rude, we become rude. If people are angry, we become angry. If people are anxious, we become anxious. If people are shallow, we become shallow. We tell ourselves we are only responding naturally, but in truth, we are allowing other people to decide what kind of person we become. Marcus Aurelius wants us to stop doing this. He wants us to become less reactive and more deliberate. This is the third big lesson. Your judgment creates much of your suffering. A delayed train is just a delayed train. The suffering begins when the mind says, "This always happens to me. My whole day is ruined. Life is unfair. I cannot stand this." A rude comment is just a rude comment. The suffering grows when the mind says, "I have been humiliated. Everyone must respect me. I need to punish this person in my imagination for the next 6 hours." Stoicism is not saying that painful things are not painful. It is saying that we often add unnecessary pain through interpretation. The event happens once. The mind repeats it many times. A person can suffer more from his thoughts about an event than from the event itself. This is especially true today. Many people are not only living their lives, they are constantly narrating their lives to themselves in dramatic language. One mistake becomes failure. One rejection becomes proof of worthlessness. One uncomfortable conversation becomes a personal attack. One bad day becomes a hopeless life. Marcus would tell us to strip the event down to what it actually is. Do not add more than reality gives you. If someone criticizes you, ask whether the criticism is true. If it is true, learn from it. If it is false, let it pass. If something is outside your control, do not give it your soul as well. If something must be endured, endure it with dignity. If something can be improved, improve it without complaint. This is not weakness. It is discipline. In modern culture, reacting is often mistaken for strength. The angry person is seen as passionate. The loud person is seen as authentic. The offended person is seen as morally serious. The person who refuses to react can be mistaken for coldness or passivity. But Marcus Aurelius would disagree. To be provoked easily is not strength. It is vulnerability. If anyone can make you furious with a sentence, then anyone can control you. If every insult changes your character, then your character belongs to other people. If every piece of bad news destroys your peace, then your peace is not really yours. The Stoic goal is not to feel nothing. The goal is to stop being ruled by every feeling. Marcus Aurelius did not believe that human beings should become stone. He believed they should become rational, just, disciplined, and aware of their place in nature. We are social beings, and we have duties to one another. We should act with fairness, patience, and courage. But we should not confuse emotional chaos with moral seriousness. This matters because constant reaction exhausts the soul. A person who reacts to everything becomes tired, bitter, distracted, and easy to manipulate. He loses the ability to choose where his attention goes. He becomes a prisoner of whatever is loudest. That is why modern life is so dangerous for the mind. There is always something to react to. There's always a scandal, an insult, a comparison, a fear, a crisis, a comment, a rumor, or a reason to be angry. If we are not careful, Our whole inner life becomes a series of reactions to things we did not choose. Marcus Aurelius offers another way. He tells us to begin the day by remembering that difficult people will appear. He tells us to remember that life is short. He tells us to remember that reputation is fragile. He tells us to remember that the body will age, possessions will disappear, and praise will fade. But he also tells us that our ability to judge wisely remains the place where freedom begins. This is the final and most important lesson. You are not free because nothing can hurt you. You are free when not everything can own you. A rude person may speak, but he does not have to possess your mind. Bad news may arrive, but it does not have to destroy your character. A failure may happen, but it does not have to define your soul. Fear may appear, but it does not have to become your master. Marcus Aurelius teaches that the world will always be unstable. People will always disappoint us. Events will always surprise us. Bodies will always weaken. Plans will always break. Public opinion will always change. Death will always approach. The question is whether we will let all of this turn us into worse people. Stoicism begins with the refusal to surrender the self to every external event. It asks us to pause before reacting. It asks us to examine our judgment. It asks us to separate what happened from the story we are telling about it. It asks us to act from reason rather than impulse. It asks us to care more about character than comfort. This is why Marcus Aurelius remains so useful. He was not a monk hiding from the world. He was an emperor surrounded by pressure. He knew responsibility, conflict, illness, grief, and power. His calm was not built in perfect conditions. It was built inside difficulty. That is why his philosophy still speaks to us. We may not rule Rome, but we all rule something. We rule our attention. We rule our reactions. We rule the small kingdom of the self. And if we cannot rule that, then everything outside us becomes our emperor. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that we do not need to answer every insult, fear every headline, chase every approval, or obey every emotion. We can stop, examine, and choose. Michel Foucault was a French philosopher who changed the way people think about power. Before Foucault, most people imagined power as something simple, held by kings, governments, police, judges, armies, and prisons. It pressed down on ordinary people from above. Foucault thought this was far too simple. He believed power isn't only found in governments. It's found in schools, hospitals, prisons, offices, families, social rules, and even in how we learn to think about ourselves. His 1975 book, Discipline and Punish, traced how modern punishment shifted from public violence to quieter systems of surveillance and normalization. This is what makes Foucault disturbing. He doesn't just ask who controls you from the outside. He asks how you learn to control yourself. Born in 1926 in Poitiers, France, Foucault became one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. Writing about madness, medicine, prisons, sexuality, and power. His central claim: modern societies don't mainly control people through chains and executions. They control people by training them to become certain kinds of subjects. Foucault isn't just saying governments lie or police have power. His deeper point is that power is woven into ordinary life through habits, routines, categories, and institutions that appear completely normal. Power doesn't only say, "You are not allowed." It says, "This is who you are." It tells a child whether he's gifted, slow, obedient, difficult, or dangerous. Labels that seem neutral, but are really ways of organizing human beings. Power produces people, not just represses them. We usually think of power as something that stops us, forbidding, punishing, censoring, but Foucault believed modern power is subtler than that. It doesn't just block behavior, it creates it. It shapes how people move, speak, work, desire, and understand their own identity. A school doesn't just teach math. It teaches children to sit still, raise their hands, arrive on time, and understand themselves through rankings. A workplace doesn't just pay people. It teaches them to measure their worth through productivity and performance. A hospital doesn't just heal bodies. It classifies them, records them, and teaches people to see themselves as cases and risk profiles. Foucault isn't saying these institutions are evil. His point is more uncomfortable. Even institutions that help us also shape us. They create useful, obedient, self-monitoring people. The most effective control is the control you stop noticing. This is why Foucault became so interested in prisons, not as something separate from society, but as an extreme, visible version of something that exists everywhere in milder form. Discipline works by organizing bodies in space and time. Where to stand, when to move, how fast to work, how to be evaluated. It doesn't need constant force. It trains people until they start correcting themselves. A person watched by force may resist. A person who has internalized the rules obeys without needing to be forced at all. He monitors himself before anyone else has to. This is where Foucault's use of the panopticon comes in. Jeremy Bentham designed a prison where cells surround a central watchtower. The prisoner can be seen, but never knows for certain if he's being watched at any given moment. So he starts behaving as if he always is. The genius of the panopticon isn't that someone is always watching. It's that someone might be. That possibility alone is enough. The prisoner becomes his own guard. Foucault argued this logic spreads far beyond prisons. A student behaves because a teacher may evaluate him. A worker performs because a manager may review him. A person online curates himself because strangers may judge, comment, or mock. This is why Foucault feels more relevant today than in his own lifetime. We live under constant, often invisible observation, tracking our steps, sleep, productivity, and appearance, frequently mistaking this self-surveillance for freedom. Norms control more than laws do. A law tells you what's illegal. A norm tells you what's normal. Laws punish criminals. Norms produce shame. Norms don't need a courtroom. They live in classrooms, offices, media, and casual conversation, defining what a good student, a healthy body, or a successful life looks like. Once a norm is accepted, people measure themselves against it without being forced. They force themselves. Power and knowledge are connected. Foucault didn't see knowledge as pure truth floating above society. He was interested in how knowledge gets produced, who gets to speak with authority, and how expert categories shape human life. The idea often called power knowledge. This doesn't mean all knowledge is fake, or that doctors and scientists know nothing. It means knowledge is never socially innocent. Once a society creates categories like mental illness, criminality, or deviant behavior, it also creates institutions and experts equipped to intervene in people's lives. A person becomes a case, a file, a diagnosis, a statistic. A hospital helps people, but it also classifies them. A school educates children, but it also ranks and disciplines them. A prison punishes crime, but it also manufactures the category of the criminal. Foucault isn't arguing we can live without institutions. We can't. He's arguing we should stop pretending institutions are neutral just because they speak in polite, caring language. Modern power often speaks in the language of help, protection, and improvement. Sometimes it really does help. But Foucault teaches us to ask, who is being observed, classified, corrected, or made useful, and who is being made ashamed? Control in Foucault's sense happens whenever people learn to see themselves through systems of judgment. The student sees himself as a grade. The worker sees himself as a performance score. The patient sees himself as a diagnosis. The self becomes something to manage, like a brand or a project. We like to believe we're freer than people in the past. No public torture, no forced careers, seemingly limitless self-expression. Foucault doesn't deny that freedom exists. He asks what kind of power has grown alongside it. Modern power doesn't always command directly. It invites us to improve, to be authentic, productive, and visible. But these invitations can become their own form of control. The modern person isn't just told to obey. He's told to optimize, to become fitter, more marketable, more emotionally intelligent, more aware of his own flaws. It looks like freedom because no one holds a whip. But the pressure is still real. It's just internal now. Resistance begins with seeing power. Foucault didn't believe power could be escaped entirely. It's woven into relationships, institutions, and language itself. In The History of Sexuality, he argued power shouldn't be imagined only as something held by the state, but as something circulating through every social relationship. This sounds hopeless, but it isn't quite. If power is everywhere, resistance can be too. We resist when we notice the categories that define us, question the standards we were taught to obey, and ask who benefits from a given norm. For Foucault, freedom isn't a pure space outside power. It's a practice within power. The difficult, ongoing work of questioning how we're being shaped. This is hard because the deepest forms of control feel completely natural. A person may believe he freely wants the career, body, and status that power has already made desirable to him. He can obey perfectly while feeling completely independent. Foucault offers no comforting villain to blame. Power isn't located in one place. It circulates through what we call truth and what we call normal. That's why he remains controversial. Some see him as a thinker who makes people distrust all institutions and all truth. Others see him as essential, someone who reveals how power hides inside the things we take for granted. Either way, his question is hard to avoid. How much of what you call yourself was actually given to you by systems you never chose? Your school taught you what intelligence looks like. Your workplace taught you what usefulness looks like. Your culture taught you what success and beauty look like. And after enough time, you may believe all of it came from inside you. This doesn't mean every rule is bad or every institution oppressive. It means we should be suspicious of norms that pretend to be simply nature. Foucault's philosophy is uncomfortable because it removes innocence from everyday life. The classroom, the hospital, the office, the family, and the self all become political spaces, not in the sense of elections, but in the deeper sense of shaping human beings. His message isn't that you're helpless. It's that you're being shaped. And the first step is noticing it. You're being shaped when you compete for approval, measure your life by productivity, feel shame for missing a norm, or police your own thoughts before anyone else has to. Control in the modern world rarely looks like control. It looks like education, health, professionalism, and common sense. The prison was only the beginning of the lesson. The deeper lesson is that a society can become a machine for producing people who watch themselves. And the most effective form of power isn't the one that crushes you from outside. It's the one that teaches you to become the guard of your own life. Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher who believed that one of the most dangerous things a society could do was give political power to people who had never learned how to think properly. This sounds shocking today, because democracy is often treated as one of the highest political ideals. We usually think of democracy as fairness, freedom, equality, and the right of ordinary people to have a voice in the way they are governed. Plato did not see it so simply. To him, democracy was not automatically wise just because many people supported it. A crowd could be wrong. A majority could be emotional. A free society could become chaotic. A people who loved freedom too much could eventually create the conditions for tyranny. Plato was born in Athens around 427 BC into a wealthy and important family. Athens was one of the most famous democracies in the ancient world, but it was also a city filled with political conflict, war, public trials, ambitious speakers, and unstable public opinion. Plato's most famous work, The Republic, is one of the central texts of political philosophy, and in it, he explores justice, the ideal city, and the kinds of rulers who should guide society. Plato's suspicion of democracy came from experience. He had watched Athens make terrible decisions. He had seen public opinion move like a crowd at a theater, excited one moment and furious the next. Most importantly, he had seen his teacher Socrates put on trial and sentenced to death by a democratic jury. Socrates had not been a criminal in the ordinary sense. He had spent his life asking people difficult questions about justice, courage, piety, and the good life. But Athens decided that he was dangerous, and the city killed him. For Plato, this was not just a personal tragedy. It was a political lesson. It showed him that a democratic city could be brilliant, energetic, and free, but still deeply unwise. It could produce art, debate, wealth, and confidence, but it could also become suspicious of its best thinkers. It could give power to ordinary citizens, but ordinary citizens might not always know what justice required. Plato was not attacking democracy because he hated ordinary people. His criticism was more subtle and more disturbing. He believed that politics is a skill, and like every serious skill, it requires training. No one would choose a doctor by popular vote if the voters knew nothing about medicine. No one would choose a ship captain because he gave the most flattering speech to the passengers. No one would trust a builder who had never studied construction. Yet in politics, Plato thought, people often assume that everyone is equally qualified to judge the most difficult questions of human life. This is the first big idea in Plato's criticism of democracy. Governing is not just a matter of having opinions. It is a craft. In The Republic, Plato gives one of his most famous images, the ship of state. He asks us to imagine a ship where the owner is strong but short-sighted, and the sailors all fight over who should steer, even though none of them has learned navigation. The true navigator understands the stars, the weather, and the art of sailing. But the sailors dismiss him as useless because he is quiet, thoughtful, and not good at flattering the crowd. Plato uses this image to suggest that democratic politics can reward persuasive people instead of wise people. The image is powerful because it is easy to understand. A ship cannot be guided safely by popularity. It has to be guided by knowledge. If the passengers vote for the man who promises the easiest journey, the ship may still hit the rocks. If they choose the man who tells them the most pleasant lies, the sea will not become less dangerous. The truth of navigation does not change because the crowd prefers a more entertaining captain. For Plato, the same problem exists in politics. A city is also a kind of ship. It has to move through danger, scarcity, war, ambition, fear, wealth, poverty, education, and conflict. If the people choose leaders only because those leaders flatter them, excite them, or promise them pleasure, the city will eventually suffer. This is why Plato feared demagogues. A demagogue is a political figure who gains power by telling people what they want to hear rather than what they need to know. He does not educate the public. He seduces it. He studies its anger, pride, fear, and desire, and then uses those emotions to rise to power. In Plato's view, democracy creates special opportunities for such people because democratic politics depends so heavily on persuasion. This does not mean that persuasion is always bad. Plato himself wrote beautiful dialogues, and he understood the power of language. His worry was that speech could become detached from truth. A person could learn to sound wise without being wise. He could learn to win arguments without understanding justice. He could learn to move crowds without improving their souls. This is the second big idea in Plato's criticism of democracy. Freedom without education can become dangerous. Democracy gives people freedom to speak, choose, argue, desire, and participate. Plato understood the attraction of this. A democratic city feels alive. It has variety, energy, confidence, and openness. People can live in many different ways. They are not forced into one rigid pattern. They can follow their tastes, interests, ambitions, and pleasures. But Plato believed that this freedom could slowly become excessive. If everyone is encouraged to treat his own desire as equally valid, the city may lose its sense of order. Children may stop respecting parents. Students may stop respecting teachers. Citizens may stop respecting laws. Leaders may become afraid to correct the people because they depend on the people's approval. The city begins to confuse freedom with the right to do whatever one happens to want. In this kind of society, discipline starts to look oppressive. Self-control starts to look old-fashioned. Expertise starts to look arrogant. Tradition starts to look like tyranny. The democratic person becomes proud of having no master, but he may not notice that he is being ruled by something else entirely, his own desires. This was one of Plato's deepest worries. He did not think the human soul was naturally well ordered. He believed that human beings contain reason, spirit, and appetite. Reason seeks truth. Spirit seeks honor and victory. Appetite seeks pleasure, comfort, food, sex, money, and satisfaction. A good person is one whose reason rules the rest of the soul. A bad person is one whose lower desires take command. Plato thought the same pattern could happen in a city. A good city is ruled by wisdom. A disordered city is ruled by appetite. Democracy, in his eyes, risks becoming the political version of a soul in which every desire demands equal rights. This is why his critique is still uncomfortable. He is not only talking about voting systems, he is talking about human psychology. He is asking what happens when a society becomes very free, but not very wise. He is asking what happens when people are given choice before they are given education. He is asking what happens when citizens are taught to protect their preferences, but not to examine whether their preferences are good. Plato's third big idea is that democracy can slide into tyranny. This is one of the most famous and disturbing parts of the Republic. Plato describes a sequence in which democracy, through its love of extreme freedom, can eventually produce the opposite of freedom. When a society becomes restless, divided and driven by desire, the people may begin looking for a strong figure who promises to protect them, punish their enemies, and restore order. The leader first appears as a champion of the people, but once he gains power, he becomes a tyrant. Plato's point is not that every democracy must become tyranny. His point is that democracy contains a danger inside itself. If freedom becomes detached from wisdom and discipline, people may become vulnerable to anyone who promises easy answers. The crowd may grow tired of complexity. It may turn against careful thinkers. It may prefer a powerful personality to a difficult truth. This is a very dark idea, but Plato had reasons for thinking this way. Athens had lived through war, defeat, revolution, oligarchy, restored democracy, public anger, and political revenge. Plato did not see politics as a calm discussion among reasonable citizens. He saw it as a struggle between reason and desire, wisdom and flattery, education and manipulation. This is why Plato's solution was so radical. He believed that society should be ruled by philosopher kings. A philosopher king, in Plato's ideal, is not simply a clever intellectual who has read many books. He is a person who has spent years being trained in mathematics, discipline, moral character, dialectic, and the love of truth. He does not want power for pleasure or personal gain. In fact, he would rather avoid ruling if possible. But because he understands justice better than others, he is the person most fit to rule. This idea is deeply controversial. Many later thinkers have criticized Plato for being anti-democratic and dangerously authoritarian. Karl Popper, for example, famously argued that Plato's political philosophy had anti-liberal and potentially totalitarian tendencies, even though Plato's defenders often read him more sympathetically. But whether we agree with Plato or not, we should understand the problem he was trying to solve. He was asking a serious question. Who should rule? The many who have opinions, or the few who have wisdom? Modern people usually answer that the many should rule because giving power to a few is dangerous. Plato would answer that giving power to the many is also dangerous if the many have not been educated to love truth more than pleasure, justice more than victory, and wisdom more than popularity. This is the fourth big idea in Plato's criticism of democracy. The quality of a democracy depends on the quality of its citizens. A democracy is not made good simply by giving everyone a vote. It also needs citizens who can think, listen, judge, remember, and control themselves. It needs people who can resist flattery. It needs people who can recognize manipulation. It needs people who care about the common good and not only private advantage. It needs people who can admit when they are wrong. Without these qualities, democracy can become theater. Politics becomes performance. Leaders become actors. Citizens become audiences. Public debate becomes entertainment. The question is no longer who is wise, but who is exciting. It is no longer what is true, but what feels satisfying. It is no longer what will make the city just, but what will make the crowd applaud. This is where Plato remains painfully relevant. He reminds us that democracy is not just a system of government. It is a moral and educational project. It requires the formation of citizens. It requires habits of thought. It requires restraint. It requires respect for truth. If a society does not educate its citizens well, then freedom may not produce wisdom. It may only give ignorance more room to move. Plato's criticism can sound elitist, and in many ways it is. He did not trust ordinary public opinion. He did not believe that every person was equally prepared to judge the deepest matters of politics. He thought most people were too easily moved by pleasure, fear, pride, and imitation. But before we dismiss him completely, we should ask whether he saw something real. Do people always vote according to reason? Do crowds always reward honesty? Do citizens always prefer difficult truth to comforting lies? Do the most thoughtful people always become the most powerful? Plato's answer was no. This is what makes his attack on democracy so unsettling. He is not simply saying that democracy is bad. He is saying that democracy reveals a problem inside human beings. We want freedom, but we do not always want responsibility. We want a voice, but we do not always want education. We want leaders who represent us, but we may become angry when they tell us truths we do not want to hear. Plato forces us to face an uncomfortable possibility. The danger of democracy is not only bad leaders, the danger is also bad citizens. If citizens become vain, impatient, greedy, distracted, resentful, and easily manipulated, then democracy will reflect those qualities back at them. A democratic system does not magically rise above the souls of the people who live inside it. It expresses them. This is why Plato cared so much about education. He did not think education was merely preparation for a job. He thought education was the formation of the soul. A society must teach people what is worth loving, what is worth fearing, what is worth admiring, and what is worth resisting. If it fails to do this, then politics becomes a competition between appetites. His message is not comfortable, but it is serious. Democracy can be one of the greatest political achievements in human history, but only if citizens are educated, disciplined, and devoted to truth. Without that, democracy can become a beautiful road to disorder, manipulation, and finally tyranny. Plato's warning is that the people can rule only if the people are willing to become wise.